Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, From Shelf to Online Repository, Creating a Collaborative Teaching and Research Collection, which is sponsored by Adam Matthew. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you'll see a Q&A panel and a chat panel. If you don't, you can click the buttons labeled Chat and Q&A in the upper right corner of the screen to activate the panels. Please use the Q&A panel to submit questions to our speakers. At the end of the presentation, they will take a few minutes to answer your questions, so please do send them in throughout. If you experience any technical issues, please use the chat panel to let me know, and I will troubleshoot the issue with you privately. Today, we're using the hashtag ACRL Choice Webinars during and after the event, so if you have another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. Our presenters today are Claire Mentz, Katina Dorsey, Sophie Heath, and Dr. Katina Sanders. And here to kick off the presentation for us is Claire Mentz. So Claire, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm Claire, a Senior Development Editor at Adam Matthew, and I worked on developing the Race Relations project. So today we're going to be discussing how archives, libraries, digital companies, and the academic research community can work together to put valuable historical resources online. So many of you will have worked with digital resources before, and some libraries will have extensive digital collections, and others will just be starting out in this area. There are still many questions that people ask about how to digitize collections, and our aim is to answer some of these today. We're going to focus on primary source collections by looking at the collaborative process that takes hard copies of historical documents from archival collections and puts them online. In order to do this, we're going to talk about just one example from the collections digitized by Adam Matthew, Race Relations in America. So throughout 2016, we worked with the Amistad Research Center in New Orleans to digitize the records of the Race Relations Department of the United Church Board for Homeland Ministries. Today, we're going to take you through the process from hearing about how the original collection was put together to finding out what happens to the document images once they've been scanned, and finally to exploring how digital primary sources are used by scholars in teaching. So to run through the agenda for today, I'll start by introducing the speakers and give a very brief mention of who Adam Matthew are. Then we're going to hear from Katina Dorsey from the Amistad Research Center, who will talk about the Race Relations Department collection and the history of the center. Sophie and I will then go through the process of taking an archival collection and creating a digital version of it. Our final speaker is Dr. Katina Sanders from the University of Iowa, who will talk about the advantages of having digitized material available for teaching. We'll be very happy to take questions at the end, and please stick around because we have a code to share with you for those attending the live webinar. So this will give you 3 months access to our case study collection, so please make sure you have a pen and paper to hand. Here you can see our 4 speakers. And let me briefly introduce you to them all. So I'm Claire Mentz, and I'm a Senior Development Editor at Adam Matthew Digital. I've collaborated with many leading libraries and archives all over the world during my time at the company. I've 7 years' experience in academic publishing, and I've specialized in history publishing since 2011. Katina Dorsey is the reference archivist at the Amistad Research Center at Tulane University, and her duties focus on reference, outreach, and access services, including digitization projects. She received her MA in History and MLIS from Simmons College in Boston, MA. She earned a BA in History from Xavier University of Louisiana. Sophie has worked at Adam Matthew for 4 years, and she is the production editor for Race Relations in America. She's also worked on a variety of other Adam Matthew resources, from our project Colonial America to the First World War, the East India Company, and Church Missionary Society periodicals. And Katina Sanders is Associate Professor in the College of Education at the University of Iowa. Dr. Sanders is a Louisiana native and former public school teacher. Her research examines American race relations, African American education, and Catholic education. So to give you a bit more of an overview, Adam Matthew are a publisher of digital primary source collections for the humanities and social sciences. We're based in the UK, but we work with archives and libraries all over the world. Adam Matthew started as a microfilm publisher in 1990 and moved to solely digital in 2005. 2010 saw the company expanding further into the North American market before it became an independent subsidiary of Sage in 2012. Adam Matthew now publish 10 new collections a year covering all areas of world history. We work with archives and libraries from around the world to digitize rare primary source content for scholarly research and teaching. We publish a wide span of Anglophone material, from 15th century medieval manuscripts to Chinese merchant correspondence and British Foreign Office files. So essential to this work are the partnerships that we build with archives around the world. And for this project on race relations, our partnering archive was the Amistad Research Center. So now, in order to tell the story of putting an archival collection online, we really wanted to start out by introducing you to this archive. Sianta Dorsey, the reference archivist at the Center, is going to talk you through the history of the archive and its race relations collection next. And I'm going to pass it over to Sianta now.
Thank you, Claire, for that introduction. And I'm just going to start by saying that the history of the Amistad Research Center is directly tied to that of the Race Relations Department and its records. The American Missionary Association, also known as the AMA, established the Race Relations Department in 1942 as a forum to engage in a national discussion on relationships between ethnic groups and racial stereotypes as they relate to economics, education, government policy, housing, and employment. So in the image that you are viewing now, it is a document related to the AMA's goals for the Race Relations Department that was written by its first director, notable sociologist Dr. Charles Spurgeon Johnson. And in this proposal, the AMA is basically outlining what they hope the Race Relations Department can achieve. And this document can be found in the online collection. Now, in 1966, the AMA offered scholar and Lemoyne College professor, Dr. Clifton Johnson, a position as director of the Race Relations Department. Now, as an incentive for Clifton Johnson to accept this position, the AMA agreed to support his vision of starting the Amistad Research Center, which was an institution that would serve as the repository for the AMA's archives. And you can find a full bio of Clifton Johnson, as well as a link to documents related to him from his profile, which is also in the online collection. Now, Johnson had previously established a relationship with the AMA before they offered him the position to be director of the Race Relations Department. 16 years prior, as a doctoral student at the University of North Carolina in 1950, Johnson had crafted his dissertation on the history of the AMA using the organization's records, which at the time were largely unorganized. In 1961, the AMA asked Johnson to formally process and organize the AMA archives so that researchers could have access to it. It was during this time that Johnson got the idea to establish the Amistad Research Center. He saw the value in the AMA archives because of its founder's ties with the 1839 Amistad Slave Rebellion, its work was establishing African-American educational institutions at the end of the Civil War for freedmen, and because of their work with other ethnic minorities, such as Chinese Americans, Native Americans, and Mexican Americans. Johnson lobbied for the AMA to build a research center after he organized the AMA archives, but unfortunately, at the time, they did not have the financial resources to fund it. So when Johnson accepted the directorship of the Race Relations Department in 1966, he founded the Amistad Research Center as a division within it, and he also served as the center's first director. The center, like the Race Relations Department, was based at Fisk University. Now, in this image, you will see the 1967 cover letter of Johnson's keynote address, which was given during his first year in the position. And you can see that he had clearly defined his roles as being not only the director of the Race Relations Department, but as the Amistad Research Center as well. So Johnson immediately picked up the mantle of developing the center in addition to being the Race Relations Department's director. 3 years after Johnson agreed to serve as director, the AMA closed the Race Relations Department in 1969 because they could no longer financially support it. However, the AMA decided to keep the Amistad Research Center and allow it to incorporate as an independent entity, with Johnson continuing as the center's executive director. Since the Amistad Research Center was established to serve as the repository for the AMA records, this included divisions under the organization, such as the Race Relations Department. The center acquired the records of the department in 1970, a year after it had formally closed. The records were processed in 1979 and microfilmed to encourage further usage by scholars. The records of the Race Relations Department was one of the center's earliest collections, and it served as a foundation, along with the AMA archives, for the collecting scope upon which Johnson built the rest of the center's collections. The Race Relations Department operated before and within the era of the Civil Rights Movement, and its yearly Race Relations Institutes welcomed some of the Civil Rights Movement's most illustrious activists, as well as prominent scholars of the time who studied race. In this image, you will see a 1967 press release of the Race Relations Institute, which announced the speakers for that year, and they included civil rights luminaries Bayard Rustin and Whitney Young. So this document serves as an example of the type of sort of top-level civil rights leaders that the Race Relations Institute was able to attract. The Race Relations Department and its yearly institutes had a great deal of influence on Johnson's success in procuring new collections for the Amistad Research Center. He started acquiring the personal papers of activists and scholars that frequented the yearly meetings. Johnson admitted that as director of the Race Relations Department, he was able to meet civil rights leaders from across the nation and expand the center's collections based upon these relationships. The scholars who participated in the Race Relations Institute or who worked for the Race Relations Department that eventually donated their personal papers to the center included historian Margaret McCulloch, economics professor Dr. Vivian Henderson, anthropologist Dr. Inez Adams, and sociologist Dr. Hyland Lewis, Dr. Preston Valian, and Dr. Benita Valian. Johnson acquired archival collections related to issues found within the records of the Race Relations Department that focused on civil rights, race relations, and the study of race in America. In conclusion, the existence of the Race Relations Department, its participants, and its records serve as an essential part of the Center's history. One of the primary reasons that the Center participated in this digitization project was to offer wider accessibility to these records, and we hope that this project serves as an opportunity for scholars to utilize these materials on a larger scale than what was previously available to them. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sianta. So this is Claire talking again here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why we were particularly interested in this extremely interesting collection. So we knew from the outset that this was a really unique body of material that would lend itself well to a large-scale digitization project, and we were sure that it would be of considerable interest to researchers and students. So as Kianta has just mentioned, the Race Relations Department was founded, run by, and attracted many hugely influential scholars and activists who were involved in both the struggle for civil rights as well as efforts to desegregate communities on both a local and national scale. So we were in particular interested in the scope of the collection, the way the founding of the department gives an insight into concerted efforts to improve race relations during and just after the Second World War. And aside from the impressive list of key figures who were involved in the department, we were absolutely struck by the variety offered by the different series and the wide geographical areas they covered. So while there are a total of 6 series in the collection, the 2 that initially caught our imagination were Series 2 and Series 5. So aside from the administration files in the first series, 2 and 5 constituted the largest body of material and really demonstrated the breadth of this collection. So while the department itself was based at Fisk University, we immediately saw that researchers from around the United States were attending the annual institute held in Tennessee, and social surveys were conducted across a similarly broad geographical area. So this was something we were able to demonstrate later more clearly by using an interactive map feature, which Sophie is going to talk about in a bit more detail later on. So the Yearly Institute, as I just mentioned, consisted of speeches, papers, panel discussions, all focusing on aspects of race relations. The content included fantastic interdisciplinary research with speeches and discussion panels by and between a really broad range of academics and activists. So social scientists, anthropologists, psychologists, historians, teachers, trade unions, and legal counselors, to name but a few. So Series 2 really offered an insight into both the organization, the delivery, and the outcome of the Yearly Institutes, the crux of which was a large and unique body of material representing views of experts working at the leading edge of this subject at the time. So we were similarly struck by the social surveys, which is Series 5 of the collection, which consists of municipal and community surveys, questionnaires, and a mixture of both raw and processed data. And the results of the surveys, which were directed by the Race Relations Department, would form the basis upon which debates about racial segregation and discrimination were founded. They were sometimes widely reported on in the press, and they really brought the subject to the fore in both local and national discussions. And then to sum up, we saw great possibilities in the huge breadth of the document types. So we included pamphlets, original audio, raw data and analysis, scrapbooks, conference papers and correspondence with key civil rights organizations. And we understood that due to this range, some of the material wouldn't be as easily accessible to researchers. And we really felt that there were ways in which digitization could both increase that accessibility as well as help to preserve the originals. And a prime example here is in the digitization of the audio of the collection. much of which was on quarter-inch reel tape and flexi-disc. And we collaborated with the archive's audio specialist who digitised the tapes, as well as an external partner who digitised and cleaned up the audio of the flexi-discs. So now the audio is available alongside the written speeches and features, among others, 2 versions of a speech given by Martin Luther King at the 1956 Race Relations Institute. So our early thinking about the project was focused on the ways in which we thought we could enhance the experience of the researcher through digitization of these diverse material types. And these factors, alongside preservation of materials and widening access, all contributed to our real interest in digitizing this collection. So I'm now going to pass on to Sophie, who's going to talk about the collection in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Claire. So Claire has given a really nice introduction to the work of the Race Relations Department and the Race Relations Institute. So I want to give a bit more of an insight into the format of the archive itself. So as Claire's mentioned, there are 6 different series within the archive, each with a slightly different focus. As you can see from the image on the slide, this is a screenshot of our document listing, a filtered document listing in the resource itself. And in this, we've preserved the ability to focus on documents from a particular series, as well as being able to browse by the themes and the document types that we've assigned to each document within it. So the screenshot that you can see is of the document list filtered by Series 6, which are the scrapbooks and exhibit items. So Series 1 of the collection shows the administrative records of the Race Relations Department between 1943 and 1969. These include interagency correspondence showing the links between the department and its staff and the wider civil rights movement and related organisations such as the NAACP and NIRO. You can explore the workings of the department, appointments, organisation of conferences and of surveys. And in Series 2 is, as Claire said, one of the larger series. This relates to the annual Race Relations Institute, which ran for the same time span as the department itself, so 1943 to 69. And these include the correspondence to and from prospective participants and lecturers, items from delegate packs, for example, programmes, bibliographies, the blue books, which were an introduction to the Fisk University campus and to the city of Nashville in general for participants. There's also the records of the speeches, some of which are drafts, others are transcripts which were taken from the audio recordings. There's over 100 hours of audio recordings of the speeches and the panel discussions that were given throughout the lifespan of the institute. There's also photographs which were taken at each institute, and these feature lecturers at the podium, shots of the participants at study, watching the lectures, and also in recreation, so they were photographed having picnics and dances. And this really illustrates the special nature of this collection, because for much of its lifetime, this institute was taking place within the segregated city of Nashville, Tennessee, but it was an integrated conference, an integrated setting, which was unusual in its own right and attracted a lot of press attention, and the photographs really aimed to show the harmonious conditions within those. So Series 3 is a small series. It's to do with the area institutes that they ran. These show the success of the Fisk Relations Institutes and the desires to replicate them elsewhere. They demonstrate the influence of the Institute approach, and they cover events in St. Louis and New Orleans. Series 4 are the records of the National Defence Education Act Institute, which were held between 1967 and 69 at Fisk University as well. These were institutes for teachers at all levels, primarily those focused on history and social sciences. Series 5 is our second largest collection. This is all the surveys and studies. These were conducted by the Race Relations Department between 1944 and 69, and they cover municipal and community surveys, advice on conducting community self-surveys. The principle for this was to identify problem areas within a community which could be the cause of racial tension. And in identifying these areas, there were hope that it would prevent further rioting and unrest. So we've got survey data covering all sorts of different things, from employment and education, health, and the data that was collected informed changes to legislation because it was used as unbiased evidence. So there are extensive population statistics, and they held a transportation study into segregated railway travel, and also a survey into racially restricted housing covenants, both of which were examples of direct influences on legislation. The final series is Series 6, the scrapbooks and exhibit items. So there are 12 scrapbooks that were put together at the end of 12 of the annual institutes, and these collate the publicity material, programmes, ephemera, key speeches, press coverage and photographs. The exhibit items mainly relate to the Cranbrook travelling exhibition of posters, which was sponsored by the AMA and proclaimed the unity of mankind and was attempting to demonstrate the fallacy of the theory of race by displaying facts that could be seen in churches and schools and be spread around the country.
Thanks for that, Sophie. So this is Claire back here again, and I'm now going to discuss how we develop our resources in a little bit more detail. So as we've mentioned in earlier discussions in this webinar, the collaboration between the archive, the publisher and the researcher is really key to the success of our digital projects. And the work really starts with the development team, who conduct extensive background research into the project and begin to study some of the essential tools for researchers which have been compiled by the archive. So these generally include any finding aids, bibliographic data from the catalogues. And we then take that data and we compile it ahead of early trips to the archive, where the content, the makeup, and the organisation of the collections are assessed in quite a lot of detail by the editor who's leading the project, often along with a team of colleagues. So these preliminary visits are really crucial to get a sense of the material types, of the possible audience for the project, how we might go about digitizing the material, which is of course a key factor. And it's really important for us to make a broad assessment of the overall condition of the collections. And that's information that we can then feed back to the archive at a very early stage. So our discussions with the archive about the project's development also begin at this phase, and we'll be asking for their advice on their collection, the content recommendations within, and indeed scholars who may be familiar with the project, familiar with the collection, and can therefore advise on the material in much further detail. So depending on the complexity of the project, we may ask for advice at many stages when compiling and confirming the material for inclusion. And then alongside these trips and face-to-face meetings with archive staff, we'll also attend relevant conferences. We'll aim to talk to scholars in the field and ensure that the findings from these meetings are taken into account in the development of our projects. We're very meticulous about keeping a record of such advice and making sure it's logged and circulated amongst our colleagues. So on returning from these early trips, we'll ensure that we share the pertinent details with all our colleagues who are involved in the project. That will include spreadsheets of assessed material, detailed notes on the condition, the contents of the material that we've seen, and we'll also be reporting on any key questions that might have been raised by the archive at that early phase. And of course, it's very, very important that we continue to share this progress and we continue to have discussions with the archive after our trips. And after any trip, we would share our material listings with the archive so they can see our content notes and they can see our condition notes. So after that phase, we'll continue to schedule subsequent extended visits, and in these visits, we'll assess every document individually. We'll produce condition reports, we take notes on handling, and very importantly, actually, we create digitization notes in preparation for scanning. So we're taking the sizings of each of the documents, we're measuring every document, we're noting down each of the material types, and we're continuing to document key data on the content. So each document scan that we plan to take is counted in advance, so we have a really good sense of the size and the scope of the project throughout this process. And while all of this is ongoing, we are requesting input from all the parties at all these key phases of development, as I mentioned earlier. So, for instance, if we find material that we consider to be in a more fragile condition, this will be flagged in our spreadsheets, and we will ensure that the archive knows about this material early on. And then when it comes to the selection of material, we're always looking to achieve a lightness of touch here. So our aim is not to over-curate so that researchers don't feel that our approach has been overly selective or in fact is responsible for steering their research. And an early editorial decision for this project was to ensure that as far as possible we could preserve the collection intact. So a particular example of this can be seen with these two speeches here. So there are many speeches contained in the annual institutes that were held, and there are a number of duplicate copies in the collection, but they have varying annotations, and as you can see from the example here, this is just a couple of snapshots of what we were finding in the archive. But we understood, and our feedback that we received was that there would be considerable comparative interest for researchers. And we also spotted that there were these considerable differences between the two, and these duplicate speeches contain these really heavy annotations during transcription. So a third version of the speech, which might differ once again, might well have been documented on the real tape. So we felt this was a really interesting aspect of the collection. And then just prior to the production phase, we coordinate a final visit to the archive, and we arrange a meeting with all the archive stakeholders, the scanning representatives as well, and we sit down and we discuss the digitization. And this is a long meeting that can take several hours, and we'll go through the handling of the material, we'll discuss the condition at length, and we'll look at our digitization and reference the notes that we've been taking throughout the development process. So the archive's input and advice is really indispensable at this stage, and it's important to stress that we tailor our approach to the digitization entirely based on the needs of the archive and its researchers. So one of the really important things we know is to ensure that the material is not out of circulation for long periods of time. And of course, a hugely important aspect is the safety of the material. And we want our archives always to feel absolutely confident that the material will be handled and then rehoused correctly. So the final phase of development is preparing a comprehensive handover for the editorial production lead. And by this stage, all the stakeholders will have advised on various aspects of the project, and they will continue to play a crucial role throughout the project build. And at this fortuitous moment, I'm going to hand back to Sophie, who's going to talk in more detail about digitization.
Thank you very much, Claire. So yes, as Claire said, at the point at which we start digitization, we usually hand over from the development team to the production. So we will have arranged scanning with one of our trusted digitization partners who follow a scanning certification that we put together to ensure as much consistency as possible across a project, but also across all of Adam Matthew collections. They'll adapt their processes to deal with different document types, for example, tightly bound printed books, audio material, fragile paper. This will all be discussed in the scanning meeting and will be detailed in digitization notes for each document. So while scanning is taking place, we receive digital images at various stages, and we quality check each one individually to ensure that it's in focus, that it's clear exactly. So the next stage in the project production is the creation of metadata. So to do this, we start with any pre-existing catalogue data where possible and where available. And this will vary by archive, depending on which archives we're collaborating with. So in addition to this, we add information such as carefully constructed key topics based on input from the editorial board and from our wider research, as well as highlighting key places, people, organisations, and the exact details of these will of course vary according to the requirements of the project. So we've done some projects to do with drama and theatre, so there will be play titles and key actors as well as various other fields. So all of this is to go to increase the discoverability of documents within the resource, particularly for visual or manuscript material which won't be full text searchable, as well as to provide an overview of each document to focus the user on those documents most relevant to their interests and research. So here you can see a screenshot of one of our document details pages. So you can see here that we've highlighted the series that it is part of, so it's part of Series 1, as well as some of the other metadata that's been compiled. We're also able to provide links to related documents. So in this case, we've got the links to other parts of this particular report. Sometimes with the audio recordings, we provide links back to the transcripts of speeches and drafts of speeches, or discussion guides, things that are relevant. We're also able to allow browsing by chapters, so to try and replicate the experience of using a document within an archive. We'll record chapters, pagination, volume and issue information for periodicals. So you can see on this slide now a screenshot that compares the existing catalogue data at document level at the Amistad Research Center. So the title that's highlighted in yellow, Mission in Brotherhood, that is the information that currently stands in the catalogue. And here you can see how it's been expanded by our editorial team in-house. For the same document there, all those names, people, places, organisations, keywords. In this particular case, we've been able to employ auto-indexing because a large portion of this collection is printed. So this allows large amounts of data to be pulled out of documents that have been run through optical character recognition software. Terms can be clicked, which then take the user to the first instance of that term within the document. So here you can see a screenshot of our image viewer. So having clicked on a term within the organisation's field of the metadata, you can see the hit highlighted in yellow on the page. Images can also be zoomed, rotated and downloaded as PDFs. And from this view, you can also browse to other parts of the document through the pagination drop-downs, and also in this particular case, we've got the chapters overlay so that you can find your way through the document. As well as all of the indexing that we do with these documents, we like to provide some additional content to provide context and some extra introductory information about the themes of the resource. So that they can be a really valuable way of enhancing a primary source collection. These features also provide insights on how the archive collection could be used in teaching or research into relevant topics, different interpretations of a theme, perhaps even new avenues of research. For example, we produce chronologies, which provide context for various themes and links back into the document collection. So you can see an example here from the Race Relations resource, but we do similar chronologies for all of our projects. We also produce data visualizations and interactive maps where that is relevant and where we have the data to inform those. These are another nice way to offer new paths into the document collection. So for this particular example, we mapped all of the surveys carried out by the Race Relations Department across a map of the United States. This shows the spread of their work. So you can see the real cluster around Tennessee where the department was based, but then they spread all the way over to California and all the way up into the northern states as well. You can use a variety of filters within this to refine the results, and then clicking on a location dot you can view relevant documents within the collection. So this shows having zoomed in on Tennessee, and we filtered the documents by reports to do with housing, and we selected Memphis, Tennessee, and you can see the related documents that appear in the right-hand pane. And clicking these will take you to the document in the main site. So this is a nice way, really, to sort of show the breadth of the collection, really. Other contextual parts that we might add into projects can include essays, biographies of key figures. The essays are commissioned from members of our external editorial boards for each project. So these are a great opportunity for members of the academic and research world to discuss their own subject areas and how that relates to the particular archival collections being digitised. It's also a great opportunity to show how the collection could be used in teaching. And often, as is the case with Dr. Sanders, who will be speaking in a minute, they will have had personal experience of working with the original documents, and they'll be experts in the field. So this really adds to the collaborative nature of our work and hopefully centres it really in what is being studied and researched right now. Video interviews are another great way for our editorial board to present their work, to offer advice for using the digitised documents in teaching and research, and to provide some more contextual information. And Katina Sanders is going to be speaking to us next about her involvement in the project and hopefully also her plans for using it in the future. So Katina, hello.
Hi, hello all. I started using the race relations documents during the mid-90s as a graduate student. I did my dissertation on Johnson's Race Relations Institute, and over the years in my teaching, I've used the documents with my students. Currently, I teach a diversity course for undergraduate teacher education students, and a few of my lectures are on race and race relations in the United States. And I utilize the Race Relations Institute, basically the pictures and talking about the framework of the project to emphasize to my undergraduate students, who are probably 99% white European Americans, that efforts to promote racial tolerance in the United States and efforts to address racial issues in the United States is not this new phenomenon that we just came up with. And so the students, what I want them to understand is that these efforts have been ongoing, that there were people who looked exactly like them, who were interested in these issues, and that whites can and do have a place at the table. And for a number of my students, just seeing the photos from the Race Relations Institute is something that they find amazing, but it's also something that I find gives them a voice, because once they see photographs of people in the classrooms and they see, if you're looking at the pictures now, you know, the photos, basically if you change some of the outfits, and maybe you wouldn't have to do that much for today's the style and attire that people are wearing. The students, you know, it's relatively the same situation. So the students find that, again, as comforting and empowering, that they too can engage in these dialogues. So that's for my undergraduate students. I teach a methodology course, and I'm actually teaching it this semester. And for those students, having access to the collection gives them not only access to the primary documents on race, but it really allows them to see the different types of materials that can be held in an archive and the types of materials that historians consider to be data. And so we're discussing, you know, what it means to have a photograph, and the collection really helps with explaining triangulation within documents, within collections, and between collections. So the students are enjoying that aspect of it. And unlike myself, you know, I made numerous trips to New Orleans to use the collection. It's a beautiful thing for the students to be able to sit in class with their laptops and have me instructing or guiding them as they're actually utilizing the collection. So that's a really beautiful thing. I'm developing 2 other classes, or in the fall I'll teach a History of African American education class. And again, having access to this data will really strengthen the course, in that the students will be able to, again, while we're in class, in some sessions, and peruse on their own areas of interest within race, and areas that really, when we think of education broadly defined, the students can branch out and they can utilize the sources according to their interests. So for the students who may be interested in employment issues, or students who are interested in race and religion, they can have access to those documents. And finally, I've always wanted to teach a class on race relations, a graduate course on race relations. And having now the records from the Institute digitized and understanding the records, it's allowed me to be able to teach that class, to envision what that class can be, because now I know that the students will have access to material. So as far as teaching, this is a very rich collection, and I really believe that instructors, professors, whomever, are only limited by their own imagination because the offering is there. And because of the way Adam Matthews, the team, has really simplified a search. You know, in the past, and if you go to the Amistad, there are files, but, you know, it's just a beautiful thing, and I use the word beautiful a lot, but it's a beautiful thing to be able to contain your search and actually find what you're looking for.
So, Katina, will you be setting assignments based on the race relations resource?
I'm sorry.
Using it in the classroom.
I'm sorry, would you repeat?
Yeah, certainly. Will you be setting assignments based on the race relations resource, or will it be purely used in the classroom?
Oh, well, I see them in tandem, and so I will, you know, point out when we're talking about, for instance, in the methodology course, we've got a very supportive library here at the university, and I actually think our librarians and archivists are rock stars here, and so this methodology class visits those departments, and as part of understanding resources and what archives do, again, the students are looking through or will look through the race relations department, the collection that's now digitized. And so again, we will do that together as a class because the class is paired, or the way the class is set up, the students have readings on how to do history and how to analyze history and what constitutes as history. And so what I'm doing with, now that the collection is digitized, is pairing the readings, you know, taking a chapter from the class in the day's discussion, and then going into the site and having the students discuss how they would analyze those documents per what the methodologists, the historical methodologists, are saying. And so, you know, again, for the students, so the undergraduate students, now that this is available, what I envision them doing is, prior to my lectures on race and race relations, they will know to go into the collection and just peruse, just see what's there. And again, I believe the way it is set up, the students will find something or could find something that's of interest. And so when I am lecturing the next few weeks, they will be able to they will be able to ask questions, and I believe it'll be a more active participation. Lectures are often difficult, but I find when students have actually read something prior to the lecture, especially if it's something, you know, that's online, the discussions are more rich, even if it is a lecture.
Thank you very much, Katina. It's been really, really helpful. Did you have any other comments that you wanted to add to that, or are you happy for us to move on to the final stage of our webinar today?
Yes, we can move on to the final phase.
Okay, thank you so much. So I hope that you found the webinar today useful, and that it's shown the collaborative nature really in which that we produce these projects. We couldn't do it without the support of the archives that we work with, and we couldn't do it without the support of the academic community. So we really appreciate the help and the knowledge and the expertise that they all provide. So to conclude the webinar, we'd like to answer some questions from anybody who's watching this. And thank you to anyone who's already entered a question into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We can answer some of those most popular questions now. If you do have a question for any of our speakers and haven't entered it yet, then please feel free to do so now, and I can ask it to them whilst they're logged in now. While you're thinking of some questions, I'd also like to draw your attention to the trial offer that's visible on your screen. So Race Relations in America, to sum up, contains the surveys and the papers from the Amistad Research Center from 1943 to 1970. And by using this URL, username and password, you'll be able to access the site for 3 months from today's date. Please feel free to explore the collection, and I hope you enjoy looking at it as much as we've enjoyed working on it. Adam and Matthew also run a series of webinars throughout the year, and you can find a full list for these at the web address listed at the bottom of the screen. So to answer some of the questions that have come in, let me have a look. So one of the questions is, are there subject specialists curating material at Adam and Matthew? Or, so that's a particular one. We aren't specialists in subjects exactly. We have a wide interest in a wide variety of historical themes and topics and eras, and it's for this reason that we work so closely with members of the academic world, faculty and lecturers who can guide us on their knowledge of a particular theme, their knowledge of a collection, and also in cases such as this project on race relations, they can advise on the potentially sensitive nature of the documents, terminology used, and things like that. Claire, did you have any additions you wanted to make to that?
Only to reiterate many of the things we've actually touched on there, and I think I potentially touched on in my discussion during the panel as well. So we understand that it's really important to liaise with subject specialists and with academics in the relevant fields. And obviously our aim is not to over-curate, and so this particular collection, we included almost the entire collection here. So it was certainly our aim to ensure that we weren't making these editorial decisions about curating the collection in those ways, and liaising with academics where we did have to make decisions. And in fact, those decisions that we made were primarily inclusive, and that example I referred to earlier about the speech, the comparison between the two speeches, so it was a decision that we made to include all of these sort of duplicate speeches, and in fact one that I remember discussing with Katina at the time. And I think that's all can add to that, Sophie.
Thank you, Claire. One of the other questions we've had is, what is our approach in gathering metadata necessary for discoverability? So this comes with compiling big long lists of keywords or subjects, and also of places and people which are relevant to the particular collection we're working with and the particular era we're working with. To do this, we will carry out research, reading widely around the subject, and also in consulting our editorial board for the things which they feel should be particularly highlighted. And when it comes to things like the auto-indexing, as well as having our primary list of terms, we also put in alternative search terms, so alternative spellings, plurals, etc., sometimes historical terminology for particular places or for particular subjects, in the hope that this will find as many hits as possible within the collection and make research as fruitful as it can be. Let's see if we've got any more questions that need to be answered. There's also a question from Stephen about the other variety of materials in the collection in the catalogue. So the original catalogue does list all of the folder items within the collection, and all of this is still accessible in person at the Amistad Research Center. What we've done when we've digitized them is there is more detail for what is in each folder. Each individual document has been referenced individually, shall we say, with all the extra keywords. So that is where we've been able to expand on the catalogue as it is. bear with me 1 second. I'll just see if we have any other questions that we can fit in. I'm aware that we're getting close to the end of our time today.
Hi, yeah, I have a question here. So this is, does Amistad retain the copyright of their images and the archival documents? And as I understand it, the Adam Matthew team created a subscription-based learning module, and does Amistad get compensated per subscription? So I will answer the first part of the question, and then I'm going to pass the second part to Sianta Dorsey, if she would like to comment on it. So Amistad certainly do retain the copyright of their images and the archival documents. And so I pass over to Sianta, who would perhaps like to comment on the second part. Just to make clear, actually, so this, we don't have a subscription-based model, and it's a one-off fee from the institution for the purchase of the collection. I'm just checking to see if there are any other questions that have come up.
Hello? Hello, this is Shianta.
Oh, hello, Sianta. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was muted. But yes,
no, that's okay.
I can go ahead. Yeah, I can go ahead. So does Amistad get compensated per subscription? Yes, we do. And also in terms of, do we retain copyright of images and archival documents? We retain copyright of what, not everything in the collection, because we don't have the intellectual rights to all of the documents within our collections. So it was the responsibility of Adam Matthew to sort of secure copyright permissions from any copyright holders within the collection that Amistad didn't have rights to.
Okay, we're just having a quick check to see if there are any other new questions that have come in. Just give us a few moments here. Okay, so it looks like we're actually just about out of time here, so we're going to wrap things up. And I believe I'm now passing over to Mark Dirks, who is going to conclude the webinar session. And it just remains for us to say thank you very much for coming on and listening to us today. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Claire. This is Mark from ACRL and Choice. And really all that remains for us to do is to say thank you to each of our presenters today. To you, Claire and Kianta and Sophie and Katrina. We'd like to take a moment to give you a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing all of this interesting behind-the-scenes sort of information. Just as a reminder to our viewers, we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACRL and Choice with a link to the recording. Thanks to everyone out there today for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session and have an excellent day. Bye-bye.